Hey guys, welcome back to more Entitled People stories. In this video, a car dealer sold my car after I brought it in for repairs. I ended up suing them. Here is what happened. So I worked security for a major military contractor at one point. Our supervisor liked using our random search number as a tool for punishment for perceived grievances with us. Normally, our search number was something around 15 to 25, meaning we would only pull over and search every 15th car and every contractor truck. It was very cold and very miserable in the mornings when we would suddenly have a couple hundred employees and contractors show up between 5 to 8 a.m. This day, our supervisor got upset because when he came in at 4 a.m. for his day shift, he was the 15th car, deciding that he must now ruin everyone else's day, even though we did our best to search his vehicle promptly, but completely, so he couldn't say that we were not doing the searches completely. So he set the day shift search number to 3 and we complied. There was only enough room for 3 cars/trucks to be pulled over at once, and once that was done, we would usually stop searches until the others were completed, keeping traffic moving. Not today though. This time we filled the search area and then stopped traffic until all 3 vehicles were cleared, and then allowed 2 cars through, pull over the 3rd, allow 2, pull 3rd, allow 2, pull 3rd, stop all traffic and start searches. We ended up with a line of cars waiting to get into the plant that went 2 miles long. It got so long the local police got involved up the road as people were blocking traffic in some intersections. Then came the phone call from a 3-star general that stuck in that said traffic a mile up the road, and suddenly we were called to cease all searches for the morning. I later heard that it had been too little too late to cancel the ridiculous searches, and our major military contractor lost a $1 billion contract out of the deal. And that supervisor was initially gonna be fired, but negotiated his way to just being busted down to a regular guard. We were union, so he started lowest on the seniority chart and got stuck working all the mandatory overtime and all the worst posts, including the one he had made miserable that morning. Edit. I should have noted that 2 weeks later said contract was renegotiated after the company I worked for explained that the person responsible for the general's limousine being held up in traffic for almost an hour had been reassigned. No innocent jobs were lost in the making of this malicious compliance. And the next one is the title story, which is titled "Dealer sold my car after I brought it in for repairs." The most insane thing happened to me a few months ago, and despite it being seemingly all over, I cannot shake the need to tell the world about it. I don't make a lot of money, but I was finally in a stable enough job where I could afford a used car and to just stop taking the bus everywhere. I went to a used car dealership to find something cheap, but also not just from a random person. I also feel the need to mention that I live in South Africa because things will get legal soon, and I know things will differ for most people since I see a lot of Americans are the ones usually posting their crazy stories here on Reddit. Anyway, I went in and managed to get a car that was only a few years old and didn't have that many miles on it. I got the car and was on a monthly plan for it along with a contract. In that contract it stated that if certain things broke within a year, then they would repair the damage. I brought the car home and was very careful with it. I know in the States and possibly the UK, somebody can tell me in the comments later, that having car insurance is mandatory. Well, that is not a thing here, and most of the time getting any is optional. But since I got my car payments going through a bank loan, they insisted on insurance, and I promised this will be relevant soon. So about 4 months in, the car is starting to have some issues and I bring it back to the dealership to get things checked out. Their mechanic looks and says that the car needs a new catalytic converter. I look back at the contract and boom, it's a covered expense. I leave the car there to get it fixed and wait patiently for the call that it is done and to pick it up. That call never comes though. I end up calling only to keep getting told to hold and then hung up on. I could not get through to anybody and it was over a week at this point, so I decided to just go down and speak to them directly. They cannot hang up a phone if I am physically there. They did kind of a version of that though. When I found the person who I dealt with the last time, he claimed that the repairs under my contract were not valid because I had added too many miles onto the car. Which did not make sense because I really just drove it to work and the store and home, local really. I was getting angry and told him that fine, if he wanted to be that way to give me the damn bill and I would just pay for it. He did not have a bill though and told me that since I had left my car there, he had no choice but to get it impounded. I was furious that he had basically stolen my car and asked him what the hell was I meant to do now. Well, his actual reply was to tell me I could always put a down payment down for another car. Making sure to state, since this car was gone, he would contact the bank and insurance to make sure they knew to cancel everything. It made no sense to me because the bank was gonna want their money still. I was right to check up on things because he did not contact anybody and the bank wanted their monthly payments for a car that I no longer had. The same thing with the insurance company wanting payments for it. I tried to talk to the police about it being stolen, but of course the dealership guy had another story about me abandoning the car there, so he had to impound it, and it was apparently my fault. I was getting a lawyer and filing a lawsuit against this guy anyway, because he couldn't just get away with stealing my car. During that time, I got a call from the insurance company telling me that since my car was being claimed in an accident, they were raising my rates. I was beyond confused as this car was supposed to be non-existent according to the dealer. This fact was great for my case and I was not worried about the money since he was going to be paying for everything once I was finished with him. It turned out that while my car was in for the repairs, somebody came in and he sold them my car. The guy had cash too, so he did not need to put it through a loan or get any insurance for it. The car was registered in my name and I guess he was told that or figured it out and just felt it would save him money. So actually my car existed again, but it didn't stay that way. His accident with my car totaled it and this time it really did need to get scrapped. I had enough to show that this guy was a scammer, and since all the above information came out, he was forced to pay me back for the entire cost of the car and the months of insurance I was forced to pay. He was the owner of the dealership and it had cops swarming all over the place trying to see what else that he had done. It must have been enough to ruin him, because a month later that lot was empty like there never had been a dealership. I still needed a car though and was very worried about something like this happening again. Luckily, I went to a much more reliable place, and since I had the lump sum money and even more saved up, I was able to get a car and not worry about a contract or a loan or anything like that. The car was mine and funnily enough was actually better than the first one. My only regret is that I did not end up at this dealership first and crossed paths with that sleazeball to begin with. Since I know people will ask, yes, the guy who had my car and crashed it also got into trouble. Not as much since he didn't know all the details, but he was stuck at the very least paying for the damage he caused with my car out of pocket. People always say that getting older and dealing with things like car ownership can be difficult, and well, I don't think this is what they meant by it, but it sure is what happened to me. Anybody out there, even in another country, looking to go and buy a cheap car, please do some research on the place first or go somewhere friends or family used to go without having issues. Too many people are out here looking to make some money and not caring what they do to people in the process. I learned more from this than I wish I had to, but that is how the world is. At least there's one less shop here with a guy selling cars twice over to make a quick buck. One down, 1 million to go. And yeah, Ripe Stars, if you have any sleazeball dealership experience stories, please feel free to share them in the comments because I would love to hear that story. Otherwise, you can also post them on r/Ripe Stories, which is the best place to post long-form stories for me to read in a video. Either way, the next one is a malicious compliance story. But before we start, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because I would love to reach 120,000 subscribers. So some background, I'm one of the youngest from a very large family. My mom passed away when I was 10. My dad, bless his heart, was from the generation where the man worked and the woman took care of everything at home. When my mom passed away, the responsibility of everything at home fell to the kids. And well, by the time I was 11, I was regularly cooking dinner for 8 to 10 people. I had a long list of chores. Truly, it was fine. I'm sure I pitied myself some because my friends didn't have these responsibilities, but I really had a great childhood, minus the dad-mom thing. When I was 16, my dad got me a car. I paid for gas with babysitting money. My dad paid for insurance and maintenance. I had to get my little sister and myself to and from school. I had to do grocery shopping. I had to get the two of us to practices and meets. I had to run chores. I was responsible for driving her wherever she needed to go. My day basically consisted of getting to school, getting home, grocery store, making dinner if it was my turn, homework, practice, bed. Meets were on weekends. I never went out, I was never in trouble, I was an honor student, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I was a good kid. All was well relatively, and then my dad got a new girlfriend. Her kids were in high school with me. She told him that if I got to have a car, I should be fully responsible for it. After all, her kids were. So my dad sat me down and said, I've decided that if you want a car, you have to pay for it. I expect you to take overpayments, maintenance and insurance. I told him I could not afford that. He told me I would have to get a job. I said I had no time for a job and he told me I would have to figure it out. So, cue malicious compliance I guess, I went and got my keys and handed them to him. I told him I didn't want the car anymore. He was a little shocked, but I guess he thought I would come crawling back for it soon. The next morning my sister and I missed the bus. I had to wake him up so he could drive us to school. He was pissed. We then got a ride home from school. At 5:30 when dinner was supposed to be on the table, I was reading on the couch. He came home and said, "Where's dinner? Oh, I didn't have a car to get to the store. I'm sure there are some leftovers you can heat up." He told me I would have to start walking to the store. I told him I didn't have time. Finals were coming up. Didn't he care about my grades? An hour later I told him it was time for practice. My sister and I needed a ride to and from practice. He told me to call a friend. Sorry, I can't. No one in the team lives in this town. It would be really out of the way for anyone else. He then drove us, then he picked us up, silently fuming the whole way. The next morning, oops, we missed the bus again. I had to wake him up again, plus he had no orange juice in the morning on account of no one was going to the store. Once again, no dinner on the table. He had to drive me to the store when he got home, and once again, we needed a ride to practice. I informed him that the meet that weekend was an hour away and we had to be there at 9. That was enough for him. It was probably the most parenting he had done in 30 years of being a father. He called me to the top of the stairs. He tossed my car keys up to me and said, "I've decided that you can have your car back. I'll pay for half of the payment and half of the insurance. You can only use it for school practice meets chores and driving your sister." I laughed, tossed the keys back and said, "That's all I use it for anyway. I don't want the car. Just sell it." 5 minutes later he is screaming my name from the bottom of the stairs. He overhand whips the keys up the stairs. Y'all, my dad never got mad. His new deal was that he'd pay for everything but gas, but I was not allowed any personal use of the car. Well, then I said, "So I have to pay to do chores and I get no benefit from it? No thank you." And I tossed the keys back down the stairs. Half an hour later he demands my presence in the living room. He calmly said he'd pay for everything but gas. I would have the use of the car when I wanted, but I had to do all the stuff I'd previously been doing without complaint until his girlfriend got into his head. He didn't phrase it like that, of course, but then he said, "I hope you learned a lesson here." I did. Certainly I did. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. The next one is titled, "Entitled Neighbor's Driveway Drove Me Crazy." I moved from the Toronto area back up north in 2007. In 2008 we bought a home on a 4-acre forested lot from the original owner. Through conversations with the original owner I remembered him muttering something about how the neighbor to the north had their driveway awful close to the property line. I thought no more about it until later that fall. Our neighbor's house was built slab on grade and the builder must have messed up or not properly installed any drainage for the gravel pad. Every time it rained they had water into their ground floor, an inconvenience to say the least. However, not my problem. That is though until the neighbor rented an excavator and had a deep ditch dug all along our side of his driveway, dumping all of rocks and spoil from the excavation onto our property. We also lost a number of trees, the all-mature black maple sugar bush trees. I was getting concerned. We had problems with a jerk neighbor in Toronto and ended up having to get a survey and put up a fence. I was not going to lose any sleep worrying about it this time, call for a surveyor and get this over with. It turns out the OLS firm I called were the ones who surveyed the development when it was built 10 years earlier. They had no trouble mapping out how and where the neighbor's driveway for over 100 feet now arced up the 12 feet onto our property, never mind the rocks and dirt in the bush beyond that. I sent a registered letter with a copy of the survey and a polite letter to our neighbor. With registered, you have to sign to pick it up. They received it but did not respond. I waited a month and then sent another registered letter. That one was not picked up and was returned to me. Yeah, that should work. If I don't receive the letter, everything will just go away. In way of explanation, the neighbor was a successful local businessman, and in smaller communities some of them tend to think that they are a bit special and can make their own rules. I learned from the jerk neighbor in Toronto that there is not much point trying to discuss things personally. We have a system, let's use it. The next letter that's sent to them is from our real estate law firm. They know the right language to use and how to get someone's attention. Surprise, surprise, that not only gets picked up, but we receive a letter from their lawyer. They freely admit that they are at fault and will make everything right. Except they don't. They don't do anything for the next 3 years. Absolutely nothing. I started receiving expert advice from some of my friends. OP, you should fix it at your own cost and then sue them for that amount. Well, what if they claim they could have fixed it a lot cheaper, or I did a bunch of things that were not needed? OP, you should charge them for all the trees they cut down and make them replace them. Well, yeah, but we do live in the forest and trees are not really hard to find. In fact, we cut down trees that get too big too close to the house. It's not like we're in the big city. I decide to do nothing. After the angst and sleepless nights with the jerks in Toronto, I decide to just wait it out. After all, they have admitted fault through their lawyer. It's not like they can wiggle out of that one or change their minds. I learn that the neighbor's wife hates living in the forest and would much rather have a schmancy house in town. And with the water problem that has never been resolved, it just is not as much fun as they had thought it would be. 4 years later, what I was waiting for. A realtor's for sale sign in front of their house. I stop and take a picture of the sign so that I have the phone number of the listing agent. I call them as soon as I get to work. Hi, this is OP. I see you're listing a property at XYZ. You may not be aware of this, but your client is trespassing on my property. Of course, the neighbor cannot pretend this is not true, and now we have to clean up the mess to our satisfaction before the property can be sold. Oh my, the 5-yard dump trucks ran for close to 3 weeks. They hauled load after load after load of topsoil. It had to be dumped, spread out and compacted. The gravel driveway had to be dug up and pulled back to the property line, and all that filled in as well. At the end, it was all seeded with the understanding that it will eventually go back to being forest. OP, is it okay now? Not quite. It looks like there's still a lot of work to do. All the weeping tile, rocks and piles of dirt were removed as well. Not a job easily done and very time consuming. Don't get mad, wait and then get even. I live in a neighborhood that has a voluntary HOA, which meant when I moved in I had a choice to formally join or not. Mainly due to some of the horror stories I have read, I decided against joining the HOA and just keep my head down instead. I keep my house and lawn looking fine though, so even though I'm not in the HOA, I am still basically following most of the standard guidelines. I can tell that the HOA president is not happy about me not joining though, because it means one less person giving money to the HOA and basically him. It did not help that the HOA president happened to live right next door to me and made it his mission for a while to try and convince me to sign up for it. One thing that I want to point out now, even though it might not seem important, is that I only have one leg. I do have a fake leg, and when I wear pants and shoes, it is basically impossible for somebody to tell unless they already know. On days that it hurts, I do limp sometimes, and that will all be important for this story a little bit later. Anyway, the HOA president was angry at the fact that I would not join and even tried to tell me things I was doing were against the HOA policy, like having my grass cut a certain time of day or parking my car facing the wrong way in my driveway, because I like to back in. I just keep reminding him that I'm not part of the HOA and don't actually have to follow their rules. What happened next can only be described as the HOA president trying to get even with me for not joining the HOA by trying to take some of my land away from me. On the side of my yard that I share with neighbor, I have a small garden that I try my best to make look nice. I am no expert, but I am learning more as I go along. My neighbor ended up building a fence around it one day and put a sign that said, "No trespassing, property of the HOA." I was angry and went to talk to him to find out what this was about, because it was my property and not the HOA property. He claimed to me that it was actually HOA property, and I probably just never heard about it before since I was not a member and could not go to any of the meetings. I wanted to fight it, and he told me that I would have to take it up with the HOA at one of those meetings that I couldn't go to. I was not signing up for this just so I could go and fight this guy over property that I knew was mine in the first place. He had no right to it, and I was not going to stand around and let him try and bully me. At first, I even tried to find out when the HOA was meeting to try and get in and explain to everyone else what the president was doing to me. He made sure that I could not get in, even though I'm pretty sure as long as you live in the neighborhood, you are allowed to go even if you're not a member. I was going to take matters into my own hands and not let some guy with a giant ego take my garden away from me as some sort of sick revenge. I waited until he was gone one day and I burned that wooden fence down until I had access to my garden again. Don't worry though, it was a very controlled flame and I had the hose on hand. I then took the now cool, burned pieces of fence and chucked them onto his property to show him what I thought about his HOA abuse of power. He clearly did not like having me show him up with my own revenge. He clearly told some random lie to a bunch of the HOA members, because the next day I had not only him but a small crowd of people standing at my door. He was complaining that I created a mess and put it in his yard, while I told him that he shouldn't have built a fence on my garden and called it HOA property when it really wasn't. He turned and told the crowd that he had no idea what I was talking about, and since he was the president and I was just a nobody, they were quick to side with him. It was a warm day and I had planned to lounge around the house most of the day, so I was just in a shirt and some shorts. So the fact that I had one fake leg was obvious from the moment I walked out the door. I was also in a little bit of pain, so I had that slight limp I mentioned earlier. I started to clean up the burnt fence pieces and throw them in the trash. As everyone was weirdly silent, it actually did not register at first why it went quiet until I turned around and looked at everybody. They were looking at my leg and then looking at the president shocked. Probably for making me do physical activity despite having one leg, even though I am more than capable. While cleaning up, I brought that sign that talked about the area being HOA property and showed it to the group standing there. That got their attention and suddenly the talking and whispering started again. My neighbor could not get a word in and I decided to milk this thing for all it was worth. I went up to him and told him that I was just so sorry it was taking me so long to clean up all the pieces, my leg just really hurt. I know it's kind of wrong, but I'll admit I exaggerated my limp a little bit, which seemed to make everyone else either feel worse or even get more angry at the HOA president. He ended up telling me he would clean the rest and he was sorry for the misunderstanding about the fence. I told him that I was just trying to move here and do things that everyone else got to do, like plant a garden. That I did not understand why the HOA was an organization that refused to let me do that and tried to take advantage and steal my land. On top of keeping me out of meetings despite being a neighbor, pointing out that just because I had a disability did not mean I should be treated less than anyone else. I knew that none of the reasons for this was because of my leg, since basically nobody knew up until that point. The shame and embarrassment that it caused my neighbor and the other members of the HOA though was enough to cause a major shift. Within a couple of weeks the HOA fizzled out completely with claims that it wasn't needed and the neighborhood was fine as it is. I knew that it was the shame I caused the president that really put the nail in the coffin and stopped the HOA from continuing to do whatever it was they were even doing. I have never been to any kind of HOA meeting, so I really don't know what the point of it is. Things seem to be exactly the same here without it, minus the random fence building and harassment. And yeah guys, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple or Google Podcasts. Furthermore, you can find bonus content by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or by clicking the join button here on YouTube. For a small monthly fee, you will get access to dozens and dozens of exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.